Hello, everyone. This is Lee Griffin. This is our volleyball officiating 2020-21 for the Triangle Officials Association. This will be our virtual clinic number 4. We're going to go through Rule 9 for as much as we can in about 50 minutes, and then what's not done we'll do in our virtual clinic number 5. The definitions of the non-playing of the team members, non-playing team members, remember, we're all the coaches, players, or anyone else associated with the team, statisticians, etc. All of those persons, other than the head coach, must be seated on the team bench during the set. And that's, of course, that team bench is on the same side of the net that they're playing. Players may leave the bench to go behind the bench and stretch or prepare to enter the game, warm up just a bit. They may not use balls in that area, merely be for stretching or going to get water, things like that. Usually it's not a problem, although in colleges and other levels of the game, players are allowed and encouraged to stand. So we need to make sure that the players are all seated on the bench, as well as any assistant coaches. And the only time that really you need to be aware of that, especially as the R1, because this will be behind the R2, they won't be able to see this very easily. But oftentimes the libero, who's entering and being removed from the game quickly, often just 1 point at a time, they will often stand when they do that. We need to make sure that libero has a seat and is seated when they're not actually in the game. As I said, the head coach can stand, and they can stand to coach their players in the libero replacement zone. The key thing there is that they can't interfere with play, and by rule, when the R1 raises his or her arm to call for serve before they whistle, the coach needs to immediately move back at least 6 feet from the court. Now, if they're interfering with the R2's ability to referee, we can move them back even further if necessary. Sometimes they will encroach on the substitution zone, and just make sure they don't do that. Use some preventive officiating to move them back away from that substitution zone. If they do enter the substitution zone, if they enter the substitution zone and it's not merely them just forgetting that it's there, if they move in there and say, "I wasn't that a double hit," then we need to give them that conduct card immediately, because that cannot be allowed, because that will definitely interfere with the ability of the R2 to officiate. The privilege can be lost. The head coach can lose that standing privilege if there's a red conduct card issued to the head coach and assistant coach or the bench. Then they would have to be seated for the remainder of the match. That's a red card down, would be required, penalty point. And if they do lose the privilege, no other coach could take the privilege up. No, it's lost for the team. And in fact, no other coach could be standing at any time other than to respond to an outstanding play or agree to substitute when they're coming off, things like that. Okay. More and more teams are using electronics, either to film the match or to keep statistics on like an iPad. And a lot of teams are streaming their matches now on the internet. That electronics is perfectly fine as long as it's not interfering with the match. The R1 is responsible to determine that there is interference with the match or not. Okay, and then the referees are prohibited from using electronics to review any decision in high school. So even though the coach may have a great video of the ball landing out of bounds 3 feet, and we're not allowed to use that to review any decision that we make or made by the line judges. In high school volleyball, the teams will change sides and benches after the second, third, and fourth set, or after the first set if it's a 2 out of 3 match, and then that fifth and or third and deciding set will be determined by a coin toss done by the R2. They're going to change, and the way they do that mechanically is that players on the bench and bench personnel merely switch sides in front of the benches. The players on the court will do the switch by going counterclockwise. In other words, if you're the R1, the teams to your left will go behind the standard and behind your stand to the other court. The team to your right will go along with all the other players beyond the standard where the R2 is. The fifth and final set, or the third, and if it's a 2 out of 3 set, coin toss is done by the R2. The teams may stay at their benches, depends on the choices made by the players. If so, after the R2 has done the coin toss, he or she will inform the R1 of who will be serving from which side, and then the R1 will either have the team switch or remain on the sides they're on. And make sure that your timer starts the timing of the interval after the R1 directs the teams to stay at the benches or switch. It takes a few seconds to do that coin toss, and that should not eat into the 3 minutes that the coaches have to meet with their teams between sets. Now, in some forms of volleyball, in a deciding set, there's a switch of courts during the set. In high school, we have no switching of courts during the set for any reason. So you'll stay on that same court for the fifth and deciding or third and deciding set. Okay, we're going to go through some definitions here for the next section. It's important to understand these because then when you encounter a situation, I think it'll be pretty easy to determine how you handle it. So the first thing is the live ball. So the live ball begins when there is a legal contact by the correct server. Okay, so you have to have the right server and they have to legally contact the ball. So you have a legal serve. Okay, then the ball becomes alive. And it is alive until it's declared dead by the referee. The referee normally does that indicates that by blowing the whistle, but it actually becomes dead when a fault occurs. Even though you may not blow your whistle for a second or two, the ball is still dead. And we're going to declare that ball dead in a number of situations. First of all, if the ball is out of bounds or it's touched and lands out of bounds or lands on the floor or it contacts the wall. So it's basically, the play is over. The ball has touched the floor or it's gone out of bounds, lands in the stands, for instance, and never touches the floor. Okay. If it contacts a non-team member in a playable area, okay. So for instance, we have a line judge and the ball contacts the line judge, right? Well, that will cause the ball to become dead immediately, and we'll either have a replay due to interference or there will be a point awarded. But the ball's dead at the point of contact with the non-team member. Obviously, if a whistle sounds, the ball is declared dead, even if that whistle was inadvertent or incorrect. But the play is dead at the point of the whistle. And if we have some other interruption, say for instance by a timer blowing their horn, a fire alarm going off that interrupts play, etc. But it's the judgment of the referee as to whether or not that signal, sound, lights flickering, whatever, if that interrupted play, then you would declare the ball dead at that point and then determine what we're going to do next. Some additional ways the ball becomes dead. Well, it can touch the ceiling under certain circumstances. Okay, so the ball becomes dead if it hits the ceiling or any other overhead obstruction, and it's not next legally contacted by the offending team. Well, what does that mean? Well, If a team has used their third hit and the ball hits the ceiling at the point of contact with the ceiling, you should blow your whistle and the ball is dead, right? Because they cannot have an illegal play next. If the ball hit the ceiling and goes over to their opponent's side of the court, at the point it goes beyond the net to the other side, again, that's the point of the ball becoming dead. Or if it's, and that's outside the team's playable area, right? So if you hit the ceiling over the bleachers, and the bleachers are not obviously not going to be playable area, then the ball would be dead at the point it touched the ceiling. Okay. If the ball becomes lodged in the ceiling, basically motionless up there, and you sit and you wait a little bit. Look, you see, is it moving at all? If it's not moving at all, then we're going to declare it dead, blow the whistle, and then we would have a replay. But it will sit up there and roll sometimes. So don't be too quick. Just make sure. Let's all look up. Is it rolling? No, it's not rolling. And then you're going to declare a replay. Okay. If the ball touches the antennas in either inside the net or above the net, obviously touching the antennas, the ball will be out of bounds and immediately dead. If it passes outside the antennas and completely beyond the plane of the net, all right, so it's outside the antennas and beyond the plane of the net. So then it would be out of bounds and you're going to call it dead. So for instance, the play you'll sometimes see is the ball is not near the net. It's well outside the net. It's proceeding toward the opponent's side of court, and a player will go to try to retrieve that so that they could pass it back into their court so it can be attacked across the net. At the point that the ball gets beyond the plane of the net, even if it's behind your stand or it's behind the R2, if there's space there between them and the scorer's table, when it passes the plane of the net, you're going to blow your whistle and the ball will be declared dead and out of bounds at that point. Okay. Also, if the ball goes beyond the reach of a player, like into the stands where they cannot reach it with one body part touching the floor, then that would be dead and out of bounds. Okay. If the ball goes completely under the net, then again, the ball passes under the net and it's all the way such that it's beyond the plane of the net, under the net, then that would be declared a line violation and the ball would be dead. And then finally, the book calls for a replay in case the ball becomes motionless in the net, and I don't understand how that could occur, but maybe it can. I even looked for a YouTube video and I couldn't find one that could show me that actually occurring in a volleyball match. But if it did, then you're going to declare a dead ball and have a replay. Okay, I'm going to go through some definitions, and these are some of the most important because this is going to define a lot of what we're doing with actual play itself. Okay, so the first thing, the definition of a contact is a touch of the ball by a player, except for hair. So if you have loose hair, like a ponytail, long hair, if the hair touches the ball, that is not considered a contact. Okay. Likewise, if the hair hits the net, that is not considered a contact. Okay, so even though the hair might cause the net to shake violently, that's still not considered a touch of the net, or in the case of the ball, a contact to the ball. Okay. Hit is defined as a contact that counts as one of the 3 allowable hits. A team has 3 hits before they have to return the ball to their opponent's side of the court, or have it be touched by an opponent legally or illegally, I guess. But so those are hits. And what is not a hit is if you have a first contact that is the simultaneous contact by opponents, in other words, a joust, or a block. We'll get through what block is in a moment, but that does not count as your first of your 3 allowable hits. Okay. Now, the ball is defined as crossing the net when it is completely passed through the vertical plane of the net. So as the sphere moves, once the sphere is completely beyond the plane of the net, then that would be considered crossing the net. It's also considered to have crossed the net when it's in the vertical plane of the net. The sphere is in that plane of the net and it's contacted by an opponent. Or if it has not yet reached the plane of the net and it is legally blocked by an opponent. All of those are defined as crossing the net. Okay. Now in volleyball, it is legal to use any part of the body for illegal contact as long as the ball does not come to rest and there's no prolonged contact. So even though if it comes to rest, right, it's not, it hasn't bounced, right? In volleyball, this is what's called a rebound sport. So you should see a rebound of the ball off the body part. Okay. If not, it's come to rest, or it could possibly even roll. And you'll see that sometimes where it will roll on the arms or roll on the shoulder as the ball comes down. That would be considered prolonged contact in either of those cases. So the definition of simultaneous contact is it's more than one contact at the same instant. Okay. And notice we haven't defined the number of players involved. When we define simultaneous contact, it can be one or more players. So a single player is permitted to make simultaneous contact. For instance, the most common way to dig the ball is with two hands together, and it usually hits both arms at once. That would be considered one hit. Okay. And that's by one player. If two teammates are together and they hit the ball simultaneously, then that's also considered one hit. And in that case, either of those players could be the next contact as well. That would not be considered a double hit or two separate hits. Okay. And then if at the net we have opponents contact the ball at the same instance, that's simultaneous contact, and it would be we also call that a joust. Okay. When that occurs, again, either can contact the ball next, and that joust did not count as a hit. So when the joust occurs, ball is coming down on my side of the court, I can play it. If it goes on the other side, they can play it, and that would be considered our team's first contact. If we have a joust, we're also going to define that the player opposite the side that the ball goes to was the last to touch. Okay, so they really touched it simultaneously in real life, but we're going to define that the ball went over to the other side as being the last person to touch. And why that's important is where it lands. So if the ball lands in the court, obviously that's in court, and that would be a point to the opponent. If the ball landed out of bounds in a joust, it lands out of bounds, point will be awarded to the team that did not push it out of bounds, didn't last touch it out of bounds. So that would be the team whose side of court it was on, but it was out of bounds. Okay. If it happens to, you have a joust and the ball then touches the antenna, then we don't have either team as having the last touch, and we would have a replay. All right, so the next definition is successive contacts. And that is the two separate attempts to play the ball, and where there hasn't been an interruption or where there's contact by a different player on your team. So you basically can't hit the ball twice, okay? Except it is allowed if we had simultaneous contact, as we just discussed, by teammates. We touch at the same time, then either of us can play it. If we have simultaneous contact by opponents, in case of the joust, then we could contact again. Or if that first contact was a block, as the blocks are not counted as hits. And we'll get to blocks in just a second. So basically, you're not allowed to hit two times in a row. And that two times in a row might be within milliseconds of each other, or it might be multiple seconds between attempts to play the ball. If we have a multiple contact, that's a more than one contact in an attempt to play the ball. So in other words, if the ball's coming to me and I'm going to try to dig it, and it hits me on my arm and then hits me in the head, right? Those are the multiple contacts. They weren't simultaneous, right? It hit my arm, then it hit my head. That would be legal if it's my team's first hit, okay? But only if it's the first hit. If that was the second hit for my team, then that would be two separate contacts, multiple contacts that are not legal, okay? And clearly, these are in one attempt. So if the ball comes to me on the first ball, it hits my arm, it hits my head, okay, I did that in one attempt to play the ball, then it's good. But if it hits my arms and then I go and play it in a separate attempt, that would be double hit. All right. So only on the first attempt, and it has to on the first hit for the team, and it has to have not been two separate attempts to play the ball. Couple of definitions. They don't really come up in the rules. You'll hear them called, though. We have passes, forearm passes, overhead passes, etc. An attack. The attack we talked about yesterday in a previous session. Remember, that is important to know the definition of. And so it's any other than a serve or a block. It's to cause the ball to be directed toward the opponent's court in your judgment, or be the third contact. And so the third contact is always considered to be the attack, no matter which direction it's in. A completed attack is when the ball legally crosses the plane of the net, okay, or it's blocked legally or attacked by the opponents, okay. And you'll hear these terms: spike, tip, dump, overhead pass. Those are all ways to complete an attack. They don't have any real meaning relative to the definition of the rules, though. You'll hear those terms often, though. So, but a completed attack is completed at the point the ball completely crosses the plane, or it's legally blocked or attacked by the opponents. Okay. Now a block. This is very important to understand blocks. So a block has a number of things that have to be part of it to be defined as a block. And it's important because remember, the block, it's a completed block, does not count as the team's first contact. The next contact would. Okay, so block, in order to be a block, it's got to be close to the net, and the contact by the player with the ball has to be above the height of the net at the moment of contact. All right. So the ball contact has to be above the height of the net. It doesn't matter if I'm standing on the floor, if I've jumped in the air, doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if the ball hits the net or not. It's where the ball is. Is the ball completely above the height of the net at the moment of contact? The reason that's important is oftentimes a player will jump to block. They'll miss the block. It won't contact their hands. They jumped way too early. Then they come back down. Their hands are below the height of the net. The ball is then contacted by their opponents. It hits them in the hands, right? They still have their hands right at the net, but they're below, the ball contact is below the height of the net. Well, then that's the first contact. That is not a block. So that's not a block. Now, if you happen to be a back row player, that's probably what you want. But if you're a front row player, you're going to be surprised that that was the first, or you could be surprised that that would be considered your team's first contact because you were attempting to block. Okay. But it's where the contact occurs is what matters. And it has to be close to the net. Even though I might contact the ball above the height of the net and I'm 6 feet off the net, then that would not be a block. That would be my team's first contact. And you can use finger action. You'll see some of the girls, particularly really tall girls, will go up and get it and hit the ball down with two fingers left or right or straight down. And you can use finger action. It's a wrist action. It's no requirement that your hands be still or anything like that. Okay. So an attempt to block is just that, attempting to block, but not actually touching the ball. And a completed block is when you actually attempt to block and complete. The ball actually is touched by the blocker. And the completion occurs at the moment of contact with the blocker. And it's not who initiates it, it's that the ball touched the blocker. Okay. Now, a collective block, that's when you have one or more, or you have more than one blocker close together at the net, and they go up to block. So you have a collective block, and then you have the completed collective block, again, when the ball's touched by one or more of the blockers. So one or more touch the ball, then that would be a completed block. All right, so we've talked a lot about blocks, and it does matter for the number of contacts. The other thing that matters is relative to front and back row players. So the back row players are restricted in what they can do. And this is for the non-liberos. The liberos have different, which are also back row players, have some different ones. So these are for the non-libero back row players. First of all, they cannot complete a block. All right. And they can't complete a collective block or be part of a completed collective block. Okay. They can participate in an attempted block as long as it's not completed. All right. So if they could be at the net and they could appear to be part of a collective block as long as no one completes the block, then that's okay. But if they are part of the completed collective block, that would be an illegal block because they're on the back row. Okay. In addition, the back row players may not attack the ball when it's above the height of the net if they are not entirely behind the attack line. Right? So oftentimes you're going to have a player in the back row that jumps up and attacks the ball. You'll hear them called pipe sometimes, and that's usually a middle hit from one of the back row attackers. And that person needs to, when they jump to take off to do the attack, they need to be entirely behind the attack line. If they jump off of 1 foot, that 1 foot had to be entirely behind the attack line at the point that they left the court, as long as they attack the ball above the height of the net. Okay. So that's effectively point number 4 there. They can attack any ball if they're behind the attack line. If they're in front or on the attack line, then they can attack only when the ball is below the height of the net. Libero has additional restrictions. They not only cannot be part of a completed block, the libero is not allowed to attempt a block. In other words, they can't even fake a block or be part of a collective block, either block or collective block. If they're judged to be part of those, then completed or not, that's illegal and be an illegal block. They cannot attack the ball from above the height of the net from anywhere on the court. So libero, remember, is going to be in the back row. If the ball's above the height of the net and she jumps up and attacks it, in other words, sends it over the net, the ball's entirely above the height of the net, that's an illegal attack. Right. Now, the other thing that can occur, they can't rotate to the front row, right? We know about that. They can't do that. That would be an illegal alignment. All right. The other thing that will happen with a libero is they may be sometimes forced into being the setter. It's usually it's some sort of bad pass on the first ball, and they're stuck with being the setter. If they set the ball and they use finger action. In other words, they use two hands overhead, finger action to set the ball. And they're not entirely behind the attack line. And the completed attack is from above the height of the net. That would be an illegal attack. All right, so it has to be all three components. If they set with overhand fingers, in other words, they didn't use a bump set to set the ball, and they were not entirely behind the attack line, the owner in front of the attack line, and then finally the attack, the ball that sent over the net, was attacked from completely above the height of the net, like a spike. And then that would be an illegal attack. Okay, need all three components. That does occur more often than you think. So. All right, let's talk a little bit about action at the center line. This is at the line itself underneath the net. Remember, we can't touch the net at any time, net or any of the standards or any of that. We can, of course, touch the center line. The center line is in the court of both teams. Okay, so you could touch the center line, but during play, can you go over the center line? Well, it depends. You may touch the floor on the other side of the center line with any part of your hand or your foot, as long as part of that hand or foot remains on or above the center line. Okay, so it's basically part of your foot or part of your hand is in the other team's court. That's allowed. Okay, but it can't be your entire hand or your entire foot across the center line. Okay, and then it can't be any other body part. For instance, any part of my elbow or my shoulder or my knee that touches across the center line, that would be a center line violation. Okay, or if what the other condition would be is if I'm over with even part of my hand or foot and I interfere with my opponent, then that would be judged as a center line violation. Okay. Now, this is on the court. So when you're outside the court, so outside the actual court itself, not the playable area, but the court, then outside of it, unless you're interfering, it's allowed. All right. So what does that mean? So the easiest is if it's outside the standards. In other words, it's outside the poles, say it's beyond where the referee's platform is. A player could go beyond that. You know, they could run to try to get a ball and then proceed beyond to the other side of the court, as long as they didn't interfere, obviously. But that would not be a center line violation. The other case that occurs is underneath the net. So the net, remember, goes beyond the court. And if you can go outside of that and not touch into the court, that's allowed. It's not a center line violation unless you interfere. All right, so unless you're interfering, you can be outside that court. And that would not be a violation. All right, let's talk a little bit about what goes on at the net. There's no problem with the ball hitting the net. Ball remains in play. Hitting the net would never cause the play to end unless it hits the net outside the antennas, right? So the hitting the net completely inside the antennas is fine, and that includes a serve or any other play, right? We don't differentiate the serve. Okay? You can hit into the net and you can recover it, no problem. Big part of the game actually is to do that. Okay, so you just keep playing, and remember, the net cannot be contacted unless the contact was occurred by the ball driving the net into the player. Okay. Now, you can contact the ball on the other side of the net. Okay. but only to complete a legal block, right? So remember, we can have finger action on a block, but we can't have a driven ball. So if I reach on the other side of the net and spike the ball down, that would be an illegal attack, right? You got to be really tall to do it, but you do see it sometimes. So it can only be a block, and it's only legal if the opponent has completed their attack, which means they've had their 3 contacts, or your judgment is the ball has been directed toward the opponent's court. In other words, it appears that the team was trying to complete their attack by sending the ball toward the court. Or if it's near the net and there's no player in position to make a play, no legal player. Right? Can't be the player that just made the 2nd contact to make the 3rd. That would not be a legal player. But in any of those 3 cases, the opponent has completed their attack and then the block is allowed. That would be considered a legal block. Okay. Otherwise, it would not be a legal block. So you've got to, in that case, call for an illegal block. Okay, a couple of other unusual situations, but you may see, you can't block a serve, right? So a serve effectively can only be contacted after it's crossed the net and is below the height of the net, because you can't block it and you cannot attack it. Okay. Any other ball that is partially crossed the net, in other words, it's in the plane of the net or it's beyond, may be blocked or attacked. All right. So the ball's on the serve, it hits the top of the net and dribbles over. Usually that's going to be an ace, right? In other words, the opponent's not going to have a chance to play it. So the ball hits the top of the net, comes over. They can only contact the ball once it is not entirely above the net. So it's started down. If the ball, another ball that hits the top of the net is coming over, you could block it or attack it, right? So because it's in the plane of the net. Okay. So I said we can't contact the net. You can't contact the net. You can't contact the net cables. You can't contact the antennas. All right. And the 2 exceptions are the loose hair, right? Because that is not considered a contact. Or if the net is actually driven into the player by an opponent. Okay. So contacting the net only otherwise than hair is not permitted. And that does include the jersey. So if you got a real floppy jersey on and you jump up and the jersey contacts the net, that would be a net fault. And that's just call it and move on. Now R2 is going to be calling most of these, so you need to be well aware of whether or not they contacted it. In most cases, the contact is going to be near the top of the net, but in high school, any contact with the net, no matter where it is, and no matter if it's in part of the play or not, you can't contact the net. You also, player cannot gain advantage by or dangerously contact the standards. Rarely see this, but if a player was to use the standard, the pole, to lift themselves up or some way like that, that would be a net fault also. Okay. And then interference. Interference can occur either by the hand or foot partially under the net, right? So that would be interference if they interfered with the opponent's opportunity to play the ball. Things like that. Those are pretty rare, but in high school you see it occasionally. The one that I've seen a few times is where the ball, say the second ball, is driven into the net, and the player will put their hands such that the ball is driven into their hands through the net and try to direct it down. Now that would also, if they're doing that intentionally, that would also be interference, and we need to call that and award the point to the other team. But once the ball is completely beyond the plane of the net, below the net, you'll see them catch the ball. As long as it's completely beyond the net, that's fine. But if it's still in that plane underneath the net, the opposing team cannot touch the ball. And there's someone there trying to play it, right? There can't be interference if there's no interference. Okay, let's talk a little bit about faults. So fault is defined as a violation of the rules. So if we have a number of cases of faults, a double fault would be faults by opposing players at the same time. Okay, so both teams touch the net at the same time, right? In those cases, we're going to do a replay. Okay, if we have faults during a dead ball, right, then we're going to penalize the serving team, then penalize the receiving teams, and then both teams are going to rotate to their next serve position. Okay, so this would be very unusual. There's a couple of there's case listed in the case book, but it's very unusual. It's going to have to be something, because a fault during a dead ball can't be anything about play. It's going to be like conduct or something like that. So in which case we're going to penalize both teams. Say we had 2 red card on each team at the same time. Well, that would be a double fault. We'd penalize both teams, and then we would rotate both teams to the next serve position. Multiple fault is a case where a team commits more than one violation of a single rule at the same instant. So 2 of us go up to block and we both hit the net, and we're teammates. Well, obviously you're only going to get 1 point to the opponent, even though 2 of us make faults. Same thing for a dead ball. If there's a dead ball violation, we're going to also only get 1 loss of rally point to the opponents. Okay, so multiple. Simultaneous faults is where a team violates more than 1 rule at a time. All right, and in which case we're going to obviously only have 1 penalty if it's live, right? See, simultaneous would be someone touched the net and I don't know, there was a double hit on the ball. You can't get but 1 point per during the live ball, so they would just be 1 point to the opponent, whatever the penalty happens to be. In this case, a point side out. And then if it's a dead ball, though, we're going to do them all, right? So if we have 3 or 4 dead ball violations, typically this would be contact or something like that, and we're going to do all of those penalties before we go to the next play. Okay. Now, double hit is illegal successive or multiple contacts by a player. And double hit, that's basically 2, the double hit signal. And then foot fault, I can't find any use of the term, but it's defined as a line violation on the center line or the serve line, the service area. I don't know why we still have a foot fault. Probably should just be removed because it's not anywhere I can find in the rule book otherwise. But know it for the test. All right, let's talk about replays. We've spoken a couple of times about them. Well, it's just a good summary of replays here. First of all, if we have any sort of inadvertent whistle, right? Time interruption by the timer, an interruption because of the lights going out, the fire alarm going off, anything like that. We're going to do a replay if the play is interrupted. Okay. If someone unintentionally serves, right, we're going to blow our whistle, we're going to say replay, and then we're going to then call for serve, right? But only if it's unintentional. If it's intentional, then we could have a yellow card or whatever for unsportsmanlike conduct. Okay. If we have a double fault, remember that's a fault by opposing teams at the same time. then we do a replay. If for some reason the R1 can't resolve the call, right? It's going to be very unusual, but if you couldn't resolve the call, you do a replay. Okay. If a player has a legitimate opportunity to play the ball, and it would be a legal play. In other words, it wouldn't be like a double or successive contacts, and they're interfered with either by a non-team member in the playable area or by an obstruction where the wall or curtain is closer than 6 feet to the court, or by the ball getting stuck in the ceiling or in the net, then those are all be replays as well. If you get a foreign object onto the floor, a ball from another court rolls on, you're gonna, a little kid runs out on the court, well, you're gonna stop play and do a replay. If you have an injury, if you judge that injury and the player could be injured further, you're going to stop play immediately. You want to be using judgment on that because you don't want to penalize the team for an injury that did not interrupt or was not part of the play. But safety is our number one concern, even more important than the outcome of the game. So if there's an injury, you'll want to stop play and call for a replay. And finally, if you remember way back, we talked about vertical basketball goals. So if the ball contacts a vertical basketball goal over the playable area, and the team did have a legitimate chance to make a legal play on the ball, then we would have a replay. And just make sure that the scorer notes the replay in the scorebook. And remember that when we have the replay, there can be no change. So for instance, by no change, I mean the team can't call timeout, we can't allow substitutes or libero replacements, etc., except in the case of injury. So if we had an injured player, then that injured player is allowed to be substituted or replaced if it's either libero replaced or substituted, depending on the situation. But that's all considered part of one play, so you can't do anything else other than replace the injured player. Okay. All right, unnecessary delay. Talked about unnecessary delay. It seems like a lot of times around substitutions and scoring, etc. You just need to look through all of these. This is just a few of them that there can be, because I mean, this is basically all the things that can cause the match to slow down. So read through each of these, in your rule book, right? Read through them. I'm not going to go through them here, other than to go through what we do when we have the situations. So remember, this can be anything from the lineup was presented to the R2 too late within the time period. We have a player show up with jewelry on, et cetera, et cetera. Lots and lots of ways. Okay. But what do you do when you have unnecessary delay? Well, first of all, this is important to make sure that the unnecessary delay, when you're doing the penalties for it, it's per set. Okay, so the first occurrence in a set is what's called an administrative yellow card. All right, and then so on the score sheet, the scorer needs to record, in the next chronological action that occurred, YUD, which is yellow card, unnecessary delay. Okay. So that's the first one for the set. And so it's basically a warning, don't do that again. And the head coach can continue to stand. They do not lose their privilege to stand for an administrative yellow card. Okay. So if within the same set, the team gets another unnecessary delay, then it's called an administrative red card. And we're going to record that in the score sheet as RUD for red card, unnecessary delay. And we're going to award a point, loss of rally point, to the opponent. Okay. Well, and the head coach can continue to stand. So effectively, unnecessary delay has no impact on the head coach's ability to stand, right? They keep that privilege independent of the unnecessary delays. Finally, unnecessary delay is going to reset with each set. Okay, so that in the first set, if we have a administrative yellow for earrings, okay, then we record it and move on. If in the between the first and second set, the coach gives us the lineup, but gives it to us with 10 seconds left in the 3-minute interval, then we're going to charge them with administrative yellow card for the second set, right? So we only get the red card unnecessary delay for the second and subsequent occurrences within the same set. All right, so that's end of part 4. I hope you've enjoyed it and hope it's been beneficial. Here again is my contact information. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know, and I will see you again soon. Thanks very much. Bye.